Hey everybody, we're about to start. I'm just making sure we have the audio set up here. Can everybody listen to me right now? Okay, great. I think we have a full attendee attendance here. So thank you again for joining this webinar today. Today we'll be talking about building products that matter, and we have a knowledgeable panel of speakers who has some deep experience building products from well-known brands like Ericsson, Intuit, and HP. I head up product and engineering at QuestionPro. My name is Anup Surendran. I'm glad to introduce Dr. Neeta Sharma, who heads up market introduction at Ericsson for the Ericsson Expert Analytics product line. And Neeta has over 20 years of experience in product management engineering in both startups and Fortune 500 companies. She's passionate about startups and is actively involved in mentoring and advising entrepreneurs. She's also a coach at the Startup Accelerator, Alchemist Accelerator. Arnie McInnes is our next speaker, and he is a strategic, multidisciplinary product marketing professional. And he's worked with a wide range of technology companies, both big and small, HP, AT&T, EDS, JD Edwards. And for the past decade, he has been on the other side of product management, primarily around the services side, but has developed and launched as a service cloud on SaaS, user engagement, service integration related products. And I'll get going here. This webinar is really a follow-up to our previous webinar where we introduced a framework for building products with a customer-centric focus. In that webinar, just as a refresher here, the framework which we talked about previously had these 7 steps. One, if you look at the slide here, I'm assuming everybody can see the slide, is it starts with observation of customers. And when you say observation, observing customers in their natural settings. The second piece of the framework is understanding the purpose of the customer and trying to map your product so that you have a purpose-built product. The third piece here is to improve transparency all across the organization, including transparency reaching the customer, so the customers know what's coming up next in your product, what are you going to fix next in your product, and how you're going to deliver value. Ideation is a concept where we co-create products along with customers so they feel that they are part of the product management or product developing process. Motivation, again, understanding what the customers are motivated at long-term and short-term, and building products and building models within products to match up with the customer motivation. Accountable is really your company, your enterprise being forward-looking and making sure all team members, including support, service, sales, are accountable for the delivery of your product back to the customer or the prospect. And last but not the least is getting all these attributes in together to make a lovable product. And one of the things we found out when we did this webinar is there were a lot of questions around observation and how do you actually make lovable products. And one of the perspectives we would be exploring further in this webinar is around behaviors and habits, which actually adds up to making a lovable product. At this point, I think it's the right place for me to pass this on to Arnie, who's going to talk about how do you build habits all across, or how do you find habits from customers that which you can map back to products. Arnie, you want to take it on from here?
Yes, I will. Thanks, Anup. First of all, I appreciate the opportunity to actually be able to present this because it's an exciting thing as we look at services and products and the development and marketing and taking those products to market. It's exciting to get to the place where you can actually deliver something that is a lovable product, one that is inserted into habits. So since we're going to talk about habits, let's real quickly just go through what a habit really is. And habits have 3 phases, and it's a continuous loop through those 3 pieces that actually embed habits within both our personal lives, and then also we do have habits in our business lives. So if we look at it, there's some sort of cue or trigger that happens. if we're looking to get better at in a sport, that is the cue. We want to get better. So there's a trigger. And then we go into some level of action to get there. We do training. We get in better shape. We exercise. We do the things and actions that actually help us support that trigger. And then it goes to a reward cycle, which is I'm seeing myself get better at something. When we lose weight, we actually see we look better in our clothes. Our clothes feel better. The weight on the scale is less. So that then re-cues us, and then we continue with the action, and it just goes through this infinite loop cycle, and that's where habits really come from. So anything within our personal lives happens in that way if we continue with a habit. Now, when we look at the next phase of that, which is from a product perspective, how do we go from habits to then finding habits within the next piece? So if we go to the next slide, what we'll look at is how do we find those habits and how do we find them quickly? The first thing is we go back to the cycle of observing, which is the first one on the on the slide around products that Anoop presented, which is we start observing people. We start observing what are they doing in their daily lives? What do they do frequently? Are those habits? Are those things that they're going to do on a constant basis? And then we can start looking at giveaway and takeaway habits. Giveaway habits are those that give us something. They give us something that we have a very positive emotion about, or something that we feel good about. Takeaway habits are things that actually we do, we may not love to do. A lot of people talk about exercise. We love the effect of exercise, but yet we don't necessarily like exercise, but it does have a takeaway, right? I mean, we do the activity because it takes away something from our lives, but that is a positive thing that it's taken away. We have social habits. Social media is a huge example of what happens with social habits once we get into connecting with people and liking what they're sharing and they like what we share. And so social networks are a good place to go observe and see how habits manifest themselves. Other things, and just at a baseline, we all have survival habits. If you just go look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, there are habits within each one of those levels. An example is I may have to breathe or I may have to eat, but how I breathe and what I eat, those are habits. I may have to do something, but how I do it then becomes the habit in satisfying that hierarchy of needs. Now, as we look forward and we look at habit forming products, once we get past the observation of finding those habits, now we have to figure out, okay, so how do I insert myself into this habit, or how do I create a product that is a habit forming product? The one thing we want to make sure we do, if we go look at our infinite loop, there has to be a cue and an action, right? There has to be a trigger and an action. If we can insert ourselves in and make our action easy, then we get to that second point, which is instant value, which is the reward cycle. And then we want to make sure that we are associated with that reward. In some way, shape, or form, we want to make sure that we are part of that cycle, creating positive feedback loops in this infinite cycle so that they utilize our tool, our application, our product within that cycle. An example of that, if we look at a habit-forming product, is something, I'll take the example of exercise, which is a standard, I want to look better, I want to feel better, I want to stay healthy. That is, and then how do I do that, the exercise? Now, Fitbit inserted themselves into that from a standpoint of, I want to make it easy for you to track this thing that you call exercise or healthy living. What are two aspects of that? One is movement, the other is sleep. So they made it real easy without doing anything else. I put it on my wrist. I can start tracking how many steps I have, what my sleep cycles are. So it starts giving me instant value without having to go through a lot of cycles to get there. And and that gives me a reward because now I know, I have knowledge, that type of thing. Now, when we look at the next aspect, once again, if I look at Fitbit as an example, one Fitbit around one person's wrist provides value. But how do you create additional value? Well, additional value comes from the next 25 people, especially if they're 25 people I know, and I can share what I'm doing with those people, and we can talk about it, and we can talk about how we use this thing. Maybe you use it a little bit different than I do. I can also engage with a much broader category of people that I might never meet. I can share my knowledge and how I do it, and then we can create an auxiliary application either through websites, social media, whatever, that starts creating these mini rewards all the way to the big payoff. The big payoff is health, right? It's get better exercise, it's to live better. But if I can provide many rewards, a star for helping out 10 people with a tip, or posting a picture through Instagram, those types of things, and I can get feedback and get rewards from those, it becomes an additional aspect of both my service and my product that then creates a broader audience. It expands the market for my product, and it creates more value incrementally for each one that adds back into the network. Now, real quickly, let's talk about how we add habits to a product. You might have an existing product. All of us have had to take an existing product and do something with it that adds additional value. So if you look at existing products, how do I add habits to it? There's a couple of different ways. One way is to find the integration points. And that means if I am a product that can easily integrate into something that's a market leader, I'll take a something like Salesforce that's a B2B product. Salesforce is a market leader with sales automation. If I can insert my product as an add-on or some way to integrate either data or functions into it, then I think I'm in pretty good shape. And I can extend and then get in the habit of insert myself into the habit of Salesforce and people using Salesforce. Now, the other way I can do it is I can mimic success of another product. In the example of an internal IT organization, once again, would be a B2B type thing. I'm an internal service organization. How do I make IT support more engaging with my end users? I want them to use it more. I want to answer questions easier, that type of thing. Well, I can mimic what is happening from the world of social and add social functions to my IT support. That'd be another way to do it. So you would mimic what is successful out there that are habits today and try to insert those into my product or service. So those would be two ways to do it.
Great, Ani. I think you're kind of almost wrapping up here. We had a couple of questions which did come up while you were presenting. One is, I think it's more aligned to your last example here, which is around, question was really around, how do you find habits in an enterprise versus a consumer type product? What does habits truly mean in an enterprise? Can you give us more examples around that?
Yeah, and we had talked about this, Anoop, during one of our sessions heading into this webinar, and that is that instead of looking at quote unquote habits from a personal standpoint, you can look at within the enterprise or even in a B2B world, you can look for processes or functions that happen on a constant basis. Things like I brought the example up of IT support would be something that happens. I introduce technology, IT organization has support services that they provide. How do I insert myself from a product perspective if I'm trying to sell into that IT organization? Can I sell services or products into an existing function? We have seen an explosion in the world of HR. We have seen an explosion in the world of managing travel within organizations, but there's logistics. UPS has an extremely powerful integration piece that fits within a logistics cycle for parts distribution, and they can insert themselves into that process and utilize a function or process within an enterprise that is logistics, and then come in with their product and show how they can do it better, more efficiently, how they can track it, how they can make it mobile, all those types of things within a corporate process or a corporate function.
Perfect, perfect. And basically, what you're saying, Arnie, is if you look at habits at a personal level, these are personal habits, your personal behavior, which kind of repeats itself because it's a habit. And within an enterprise, a habit really is a process which repeats itself, which adds some kind of business value to that business, right? And you're
Exactly. And we go to your company and we look at QuestionPro. One of the things that happens in the marketing process is when I go to market with a product, prior to that, I need to be investigating by asking questions of either existing or prospective customers. How do I gather that information? QuestionPro is a perfect example of how to insert the process is there. Now it's like, how do you insert my product into that process to make it better, more efficient, get into that feedback loop so that they use it on a constant basis.
perfect, perfect. Thank you so much, Arnie, for your insights and the experience-driven insights. To be honest, it has been pretty useful for us to understand how you take habits and push that into an enterprise. So moving on, we have Neeta, who's going to go through some case studies she's been practicing her product management skills on. Neeta, do you want to go ahead and walk through what the key characteristics of a habit forming product are?
Yeah, thank you, Anup, and thank you, Ani. So I'm going to actually start with maybe some personal anecdotes of the products that I see habit forming in my life. And let me talk first about Fitbit. I started out with using Fitbit a little while ago. Said, let me count the steps. Let's see how we can get to the goal of 10,000 steps. I have pretty, sedentary office style, go to the office, sit at my desk for many hours. And how do I change that? So I started out with just clipping the Fitbit on, seeing my steps. And it has gone a long way to today, where it is integrated exactly into my life, and I use it every day and many times in the day. And I can even remember a time when I came to the office, I'd forgotten my Fitbit at home. I actually drove back home to get my Fitbit because I didn't want to lose the few thousand steps I get during the day. The other example I have is Candy Crush. And to gamers like us, Candy Crush has got a right level of challenge, a right level of success, to Arnie's point of reward, that helps me kind of play it several times a day. I'm addicted to that game. It is part of my life. When I look at some of these habit-forming products which are so integrated into your life that you cannot imagine a day without interaction with that product, there are some things which are common across all of these products. And I was going to talk about some of these common characteristics, as well as how do you build these characteristics into the products you design. So let's first talk about delight. To me, delight is the most important factor. When you use these products which are so integrated, they generate delight. There's a strong emotional connection that the user feels to the product. And we'll talk a little bit about how do you create it and how do you understand when you have delight in the product. But that's really key, emotional connections that end users feel with the product that they use. And it can be a bunch of different things. It could be that you're solving an existing problem, but just solving it with an outstanding experience. For example, let's talk about the iPod. When the iPod came out, there were many MP3 players already in the market. But the experience was so outstanding and so intuitive that it became a part of everyone's life and totally changed the industry. Or you could look at a new problem. Though pedometers is not new, but digital pedometers were relatively new when Fitbit came on. They solved a new problem, iPod solved an existing problem, but both have managed to get into a habit into their end users. So it could be either way, but what's really important is the solution to get one key pain point right the first time. It has to be intuitive. You should not require the user to figure out a lot of things to know how to use the product. You can iterate on it, and we'll talk about feedback loops, which are extremely important, and what does the iteration get you to make it into a habit. But when you start out, you should appeal to the user with a very intuitive, get it right, with one key pain point the first time, so that they start getting hooked onto the product, and through the iteration and the feedback cycle, it starts becoming integrated into their life. And we'll talk a little bit more about how you do that. So let's talk a little bit more about the delight factor. And delighting the customer, really think about your product design in terms of the emotional connection that you can create within the product for the end user. Let me talk a little bit about Intuit. When I was working there, it is a very customer-centric culture. There's extreme focus on the customer. And one of the mechanisms which is used is called Follow Me Home. We actually go to the customer's environment and you observe them doing the tasks which your product would typically do. So you don't talk as much, you observe. You observe how they're doing something and what tools do they use today for doing it. We're looking at payroll, for example. Every Friday, the small business owner creates paychecks for his employees. It's Friday afternoon, he's sitting at his desk with a stack of timesheets, and he has to create paychecks before the end of the day, either through direct deposit or physical checks, but he has to do this because the employees have to get paid. When you sit there and you observe the small business owner as he creates the paychecks, looking at the timesheets, are the hours written, is overtime written, how does he compute it, how does he really do this efficiently, you understand the customer's pain point to a very emotional level. So you are able to relate to what the challenges are for the small business owner as he does this in a time-crunched manner, and he has to do it right, and he has to do it on time. So it's really important that you understand the persona. Who is using your product? What are their habits? And what are their habits so that you can address their pain point in an intuitive and easy way? And the other piece is observe the customers in their environment. Sometimes it's not always possible to do this, but as far as possible, the value of observing it gives you a clear insight into what can create an emotional connection with your product.
Perfect.
We'll talk of another example which might be a bit abstract, but talking about executives. A data center executive who depends on knowing how his data center is doing. In this, typically, before we had the product, as one of the startups that I was working at, the data center executive would get a big stack of charts every day to know where his data center looked. Now, this is overwhelming to anyone. What we did was that we observed this process, observed what is happening, what is the key pain point, and translate this to a couple of key metrics which will address the questions that he cares about. How is the data center looking? Am I able to meet the needs of his customers? And that's what we did. So by understanding the customer, the persona's habits, observing the customer, we came up with a solution that could address the pain points in an intuitive manner and appeal to the person, because they can now do something it's so much easier and better than they could do it before the product.
Perfect, Neeta. Just before we move on further, small request back to our attendees. Please feel free to ask your questions in the chat or the question section on GoToMeeting. Also, for the Twitter, we do have a hashtag called #products-in-demand, all one word, products in demand on Twitter, in case you have any questions to ask specifically to QuestionPro. Neeta, thanks again. I'm just I'm just going to take you to the next slide here.
So we cannot have any discussion without Dilbert. So this is the case of Dilbert's customer who loved the product so much, was so excited that he forgot to eat and starved himself. So while we don't want to go down this typical route, but we want to kind of really focus on stickiness. Retention and stickiness are really important for the habit creating product. And we'll talk about how do you create that and how important feedback is into that process. Let's look at the next slide. And
Nita, before moving on, so your goal as a product manager or product marketing specialist is to create stickiness. Is that a fair? One of your goals is to create stickiness. Is that right?
That's correct. So you start with creating the hook. Get one key pain point solved. You create a hook for the customer to start using the product. But beyond that, stickiness is really critical, because unless you get the feedback, and we'll talk about how to get feedback, and you expand what you're doing, it'll never become habit forming and never be as sticky, or retention will not be addressed. So
Right.
It's really important. I think that's the key to making it habit forming.
Right. And from a business standpoint, the more sticky you make your product, the more retention you gain from a customer retention standpoint. Correct?
That's correct.
Perfect. Great. Go ahead, Nita.
And here, this is it comes out with the sorry, I'm getting a bit of getting the feedback. So different ways of getting the feedback, and Arnie talked a little bit about the survey mechanism, and that's really critical. You need to know how your customers are feeling about your product, and you need to do it in different forms. The surveys which really tell you what's the customer feeling, quick, simple surveys, but at least you need to know what are they using the product, what's become part of their day, and how is it integrated into their life. You need to understand that, and you can do that obviously, because you can't always get into the customer's environment, but surveys, and the other is product-embedded feedback. So you can embed within your product mechanisms of giving feedback. You track what's the customer doing, how much time are they spending on activities, how much time are they spending on particular functionality. So the feedback will give you insight into how you expand your product, make it sticky, as well as become habit forming. And let's go back to the Fitbit example. So started out with a substitute for a pedometer, knowing how many steps I take. So right now, it's a health management application. So it is used for so every aspect of health management. Tracks weight, tracks exercise, sleep, what I eat, how is my activity level, what's my active minutes. So it has managed to integrate itself so much into my life, because it observes the feedback of how is the product used, and how you can hook on to other aspects that I care about. So feedback is key, and that's what will make it into a habit format. Let's continue on this line of talk a little bit about the communication. So going on to the next slide. So communication is key. Feedback is one of the mechanisms of communication. Really important, very important to get that feedback from customers. And other piece of communication, proactive communication that you need to do to the customer. I get emails from my apps saying that, hey, it looks like you didn't exercise much this week. Here's a little motivation for you to go and do today. So it is giving me, supporting me through the process of making it a habit. So giving me valuable information, is giving me some guidance, but it's letting me do it on my time. It's not saying, hey, go out and do something right now. So, you need to constantly communicate with your end users, giving them tips and to help them, and will also make it into the habit. At the same time, getting feedback from them on that you can enhance your product and make their experience even better.
Great. This is probably the last slide you have, Nita. Correct me if I'm wrong.
That's correct.
Perfect. We had a couple of questions which did come up, and I thought it'll be right to just ask them right now. One of them is related to your experience at Intuit. How do you compensate customers for letting you into their homes? And it came from Paul. Thank you, Paul.
It's a very well-established process at Intuit. So almost all the products, Follow Me Home, are typically part of the of the experience. So it really, there could be the monetary compensation. A lot of times we also find that customers are very interested in engaging in the feedback loop. So, we do usability, for example, as well as Intuit. And there is some monetary compensation which is given, but there's also compensation in terms of, they're excited to be involved in the process of shaping a product. So I think there's an emotional aspect which customers do care about. At the same time, there's a monetary compensation.
Great, great. The other question, again, to you, Neeta, is how many touch points would you try to target in terms of getting feedback so that the customers are not annoyed with either the information or they feel less excited or less engaged by the product, right? So number of touch points, when do you do it? That's typically a question. How best can a company achieve this balance?
Yeah, I think I look at two pieces. One is, the unconscious feedback which you can get, and then the conscious feedback. So if you look at unconscious feedback, most of the products that I worked in had embedded analytics. So you would get feedback back to the creator of the product as to, what features were used, how much time was spent on something. So you get some unconscious feedback. But when you talk about conscious feedback and touch points, or when you contact the customer, it really comes back to understand the customer. So when Fitbit sends me a note at the beginning of every week saying this was the activity at the end of last week, it is extremely useful to me. I look at it and say, oh, that was a really bad day. What happened on that day? It was my worst day, my best day. And so because I've understood the profile of people like me who are kind of looking at this is really important to their life, that they can send me back the information, and it's extremely useful. Again, in the middle of the week, when I get a note saying that, hey, looks like you're having a low week this week, look at this 10-minute workout which you can do, and this is a different app, a 10-minute workout that you can do, which will get you going. So they have understood me as a persona, as a user, and I think the touch point really depends on how you understand the person, what are their habits, so that you can insert yourself in those touch points versus, annoying them with information is not useful, right? So you need to get feedback and try to understand what the customer does. You can do the touch points which matches their habits.
Got it, got it. One more question for Arnie. Within an enterprise life cycle, both in terms of pre-sale, sales, support, and usage of a product, where have you seen most value derived from sending surveys to your end users, sending surveys to management? Where do you see the maximum amount of benefits you've seen primarily in the enterprise space, Arnie?
From my experience, it is a process that is best supported, and there's really a lot of echo. When you are either in a cycle of, when you're either in a cycle of needing to create additional features and functions, so you're in a Rev 2 or a step upgrade, that would be one way that I would go poll existing users or buyers or recommenders, depending on who they were in the process, and try to get feedback on how did I do, how is this working, do you find you're getting value. If there's any way I can track usage based upon, if it's a SaaS application and I can determine usage on my side, then I can look at usage patterns to see which features and functions they're actually using, and then ask questions around ones that potentially I thought were important but aren't being used. Maybe they're too hard to use, whatever. So I see the most value as a kind of a feedback cycle as I look at upgrades and updates. It can be used in the initial cycle, but in the initial cycle, I'm really trying to get as quickly as I can from idea to launch, because it's only through that iterative cycle of having a product out there being used that I actually get lots of value. So I potentially will poll. Much more prevalent to poll either it's a extension product, it's a updated product, upgraded product, or it's in some sort of release cycle.
Perfect. Got it. Got it. The one other piece just to highlight, we have a couple more questions coming through, but the structure around supporting the process of a habit forming cycle is pretty important in an enterprise because habits within an enterprise drive most of the communication around that process too. So it's this infinite cycle where the process supports the habit, and the habit itself supports the process. So thanks for pointing that out, Neeta. And I'll just jump in straight to the next question here from Gina, the audience, and her question is, what can we do in a tangible manner in our company in the next few days? And it's interesting that you asked that, Gina. We do have a slide which I'm going to summarize from the key points from both Neeta and Arnie in the next slide here. I'll move straight into that. So where do you start within your company, whether it's a startup, an enterprise, it doesn't really matter, but the next 30 days, if you start looking at a 5-step action plan, step number 1 would be to list 5 habits of your customers. And if you don't know, first of all, ask them, send them a survey, observe them. I would highly recommend that's the highest, one of the most valuable steps in our framework. Start with observation, see what they do with a normal day, see what motivates them during the course of a day, or make some assumptions and validate them again by either sending out a survey and say, hey, we think that this is what you want to see in the product, or this is what you do on a regular basis. Make some assumptions and let them invalidate that for you. The next step would be to take each habits, think about how your product either supports it or detracts from it. So anything which your product supports will magnify or amplify that habit. Anything which it kind of conflicts with the habit would detract away from it. So it won't get aligned, and then you don't have what Neeta called a sticky product. And then once you have this in what we call in product management space, use cases, user stories, or scenarios, you find the ones which gives you the maximum benefit from a customer standpoint, right? So you say, what's the highest value we can get? The value, again, is interpreted by many different forms and factors. Actually, I did recently talk about it. You have a utility value for a feature, a capability, a network value, which Arnie talked about. So the value could be in business terms, it could be in market terms, it could be just your personal value gained from that product. Find what is key for your end customer and develop user stories or use cases. And while you do it, make sure you go back to thinking about the habit, plan for stickiness in the design process, see how it integrates seamlessly with the least amount of friction. And towards the end, you continuously iterate on the functionality, capability, or feature through measured feedback, either within the product or by sending out surveys. But this is where the iteration cycle happens on, hey, you know what, I thought you're going to generate some value. I thought you're going to get some value from this product line, but this is the value the customer perceives. And you take that feedback and either augment that functionality, improve the flow, or introduce a net new feature or capability within the product line. That's pretty much it. We have these 5 action steps for you to take to build habit forming, lovable products. And I will kind of wrap up here unless we have other questions coming in. I'm just looking at the Q&A section here with any more questions coming up. I think there's one more question which did come up. I think it's both targeted towards you, Neeta and Arnie. In terms of the network effect, how do you harness social capital within an enterprise? Again, this seems to be all enterprise driven. And how do you do this within an enterprise such that there's a social aspect to it? And how do you continuously nurture it? So it's a little vague, but I think you guys get the idea around the theme around that question. Ani, do you want to take this?
Yeah, I will throw a first attempt at it at least. Within the enterprise, now I'm going to dig way back into my career and pull out a old sales seminar that I went to that was called value-based selling. One of the things that they taught within that seminar was that there are people who have influence based upon their title, and then there are people that have influence based upon their knowledge, who they are, how they interact with people. In other words, all the other intangibles. It's not necessarily based upon a specific title. In other words, the CEO has a certain amount of influence based upon their title. But there may be someone equally as powerful within an organization that has a huge amount of influence, but they do not have that level of a title. Maybe they've been there for 30 years and they've mentored a significant number of employees through processes or provided information and guidance and in different functions of the job, that because of that they have a significant amount of influence. There isn't much difference between the world of social media out in the marketplace and social media, if you want to call it that, within the enterprise. There's those two levels of influencers. So you need to find out, how do I ensure that I have both of those types of people on my team as I want to propagate a message going out into the employee base. So you have to, some way you have to figure out who those are. I'll go back to the original. There's those three ways. We go back to our action steps. You observe, you ask, or you assume. If you can go back to those three things and say, how do I find an influencer? Well, it's pretty obvious. If they're the CIO, they are going to be an influencer. It's not as obvious, these hidden people. So you start asking questions. You find out who do you go to and insert the function or insert the question. Who would you go ask? It's those types of things. So you start finding out who is it that is in the network that's providing all that information. And then you start tracking them and you go to them, or you find out more about them, or however you want to investigate them further. That would be my suggestion.
Perfect. Thanks for helping us understand the navigation of people and how do you identify the key influences within an organization. One thing I would definitely like to add is you do have these what we call the water cooler conversations happening within an organization. Now that could actually happen at the water cooler, or it could happen within a platform. So a platform like Slack, for example, or a platform like SharePoint, where conversations do happen on that platform. Now, when you think about these platforms where collaboration happens, it'll be smart enough to hook your product back into these platforms just to magnify the effect of the product, right? So an example would be when you have a reporting capability within your product line, you try to integrate with SharePoint that it seamlessly integrates this reporting functionality within that portal, right? So these are things you can consider depending on your enterprise and how you magnify your network effect using your product or your solution. Great, thanks a lot, Arnie and Nita. I'm going to wrap this up, but most importantly, all attendees will receive an email with slides and link to the recording and a recap in a blog post with other FAQ or questions and answers all summarized in one blog post. So please be aware that you will get an email, and this slide will actually be shared on SlideShare, just like our previous webinar. And inside the slide, in the last deck, as you see here, last slide you see here, is a link to the previous webinar SlideShare. So you want to go back and refer to the 7-step framework for building products, just go ahead and click on the link. Thank you everybody for being part of this great webinar, and thank you, Nita, Arnie, and we're wrapping this up. Thank you.